All right, brilliant. Welcome back, everybody, both in the real world and the virtual world. I hope you managed to connect with some people, either offline or online, and grab that coffee and that comfort break. Just as a reminder or a new piece of information for the virtual group, we are apparently now also on YouTube. So you can search on YouTube on Thought Leader Global and register there, and then you can follow us there as well. Besides that, I'm now going to introduce Carlos Kina, founder and managing partner of Beyond the Deal. And Carlos has many, many years of M&A experience, 15 to 20, I believe. And yeah, and is experienced in delivering and accelerating M&A benefits, but with minimizing the cost and the business disruption. And I think what we've learned in the first couple of presentations, that is, of course, absolutely critical. Carlos has experience with many large multinationals and in various global deals. So I'm sure you can teach us a lot as well about the mid-sized organizations that you've worked for, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. Thanks, Carlos.
Very much, Gabe. Okay, so first, just to double check everyone can hear me okay, and the sound's coming through virtually. Great. Great to be back. We haven't been at a physical event like this for quite some time, same as all of you. And I guess I want to just echo some comments Gabe made earlier with a specific thank you to Robert. I think Robert's probably been doing a heroic job behind the scenes to make this all happen. So, you know, a good shout out to Robert for getting us all here. When I was here giving presentations 3 or 4 years ago, one of the comments that sometimes would come back to me or others in the breaks was, there's really good information coming out of these conferences. The presentations on change management and communications and how to measure M&A and how to govern it, it's all brilliant. I just don't happen to have a team of 30 people back home that can help me do this. I don't have the kinds of resources that a Shell or a Coca-Cola or a GlaxoSmithKline might have to apply to this. How can I try and make use of this in the organization that I have? I am really busy doing acquisitions, but for my company, really busy is 2 a year or 3 a year. They're still big and complex for us. And so, in fact, as most of you will know, as the deal size decreases, the complexity does not. You know, the amount of effort you might need to take to do something may reduce. But just because it's complicated, you know, or just because it becomes easier from a resource standpoint does not mean that it's any less complicated. So one of the questions that regularly came to us is, well, how do we try and do this even though we don't have those kinds of resources or maybe a smaller organization ourselves? So this presentation is presented as the challenges and opportunities for mid-sized organizations. As I suspect you'll see as we go through this, a lot of the things we talk about are actually irrelevant of size. You know, it just depends on the frequency of the deals that you do and how well set up you are as an organization and how mature you are as an organization to go through some of these things. This presentation is not based on any specific piece of analysis or research that we've conducted. It is based on the 20 or so years of experience that my team and I have had in working with, I'd guess, about 40 or 50 organizations within that size of maybe $1 billion or so in revenue. Pick your currency carefully. A few thousand people who are doing those 1, 2, 3 deals a year. But again, as we said, that, you know, that challenge can also be seen with clients who are a good bit smaller and in some cases a bit larger. One point came out of the break. If you do have any questions in the middle, I'm actually happy to go ahead and take them. The presentation piece, mercifully, shouldn't be too long. So if you do have a question that's burning, that can't wait, do feel free to just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. Okay. If you really had to summarize our view of what tends to happen as you grow and when you look at doing M&A, this was the best picture analogy I could come up with. You're getting better at due diligence. You're getting better at analysis. You're getting better at financial modeling. Your processes for target sourcing and target profiling are better. Even you're thinking about integration is finally beginning to come upstream where it needs to be. What's changing, though, is that you're also having increasing challenges in getting to the destination that you may determine. I'm seeing some nodding faces. Is this familiar to some of you? It's swampy out there. Things that used to take a relatively short amount of time to do as far as the journey are taking a lot longer. And suddenly the swamp is also infested with crocodiles. There are all sorts of extra gotchas. So that's an important perspective that we find is useful. Just because the understanding of what you're trying to achieve may have improved, at the same time, your ability to get there can actually become harder. Now, what does that mean in practice? What we've seen is that as organizations grow, they tend to, of course, become a little bit more processized, more standardized, more complex organizationally, from an operating model standpoint. So you end up in a world in which the success that you enjoyed through having agile people and individuals in the business is moving towards success because you have an agile organization. Your processes are helping you deal with the unexpected, as many of us have seen in the last 18 months. The experience sharing no longer is because Jane is just down the hall and she worked on the last deal. You've got to have some way of capturing that experience from Jane, who is now actually working in Singapore. So you need some more structured ways of codifying that learning. Because I think, as we all know, we're all experienced M&A and integration professionals in here. This is not a skills-based discipline. This is an experience-based discipline. There's only so far that fancy consulting models like ours and checklists can get you. You have to have comfort with ambiguity. Previous speaker talked about us living in a VUCA world. Yes, yes, it was ever thus in this space. You've got to be able to manage the unexpected, and that benefit of having individuals who can strike out there and do it their own way is no longer necessarily as helpful as making sure that you have a team that is all aligned and doing it a particular one way. So the question then becomes, as your business has moved from the left hand of this page to the right hand, are you really ready to deliver on the promise of that deal? As the saying goes, ability to buy does not denote readiness to own. So we've highlighted 6 specific things, which may appear a little bit theoretical on the screen, so I'm going to try and bring some practical cases to each of these. And again, more than happy to hear some from all of you. One of the first things that people see, of course, is that they have the need, but they no longer have the resources to do it. The ability to have 1 or 2 people from inside the organization that they might be able to get this done off the side of their desk just no longer works. Personally, I would argue it never did, but it's even harder to do when you get to a larger size. You're maybe not quite at that stage where you're justified in building your own internal team, but you still need the resources. And again, Jane is no longer available to help you on this deal, even though she did a fantastic job on the previous one. There was a piece of research a long time ago that talked about the ability to continue to improve your M&A and integration capability is based as much as anything on the ability to capture that knowledge and reuse it, or to have a cadre of people that you can reuse. If you have a great experience doing the first deal, but then all those people move on and do something else, then you're back to square one. And reflecting on what some of our friends at GSK say, some of the most dangerous people doing acquisition integration are those who've done it once. Sure, I've done it once. This is easy. I know how to do it. I'll just do the same thing again. And we all know where that leads. So your deal frequency and complexity is increasing. You don't have those internal resources. And of course, the transaction fees and all the associated fees in defining that destination are going up. So simply put, what we recommend is go ahead and at least get an individual. The first person on the ground should be that person who is helping to program manage, correct, the work that's done. We would argue both pre-deal and post. That's a role which, again, if you're doing serial deals, you should certainly be able to justify as a permanent hire. But then at the same time, tag individuals within the business to make sure that, that they can be brought on board to support due diligence or integration design or execution as needed. And rather than worrying about how they can do that job alongside their existing one, the way to do it is to make sure that you've got some backfill options for them. So when John is pulled into that next deal, don't ask John to do that alongside his day job, because John's usually busy enough as it is, but make sure that you've got a solution so that John gets help in his old role rather than the new role, so that John continues to learn from what he's doing. And then where you need to, go ahead and have that set of external groups, but if possible, try and select ones that will stick with you from one deal to the next. No, that's not helping you build your learnings in-house yet, but at least you've got one group that doesn't have to relearn your business each time you go through. Then we come to the idea of the approach. We are, as some of you may recall from previous conversations that we've had, there is a place for checklists, but checklists will not define your playbook. That doesn't mean you can't have an approach. There is a real value in having a standardized approach that connects all the dots between pre-deal and post. And therefore, we recommend that you go ahead and start putting that in place. But like all good playbooks, make sure that it is something which is not just developed, that's the easy part, but make sure that it's actually going to be used afterwards. So you need to find ways to break the non-invented here. And that, you know, as often as not, that's about making sure, jumping to the last point, that you have some kind of custodian, whether it is your head of M&A or strategy, or someone else, you know, someone who can make sure that people understand that that approach exists, that helps them apply it when one deal comes up or another, that helps make sure it stays in place even when that head of M&A moves. We've seen, unfortunately, a number of cases where we will have helped develop a playbook with one head of strategy, and then that person moved even within the business, and we found, to our slight frustration, that the incoming head, who still wanted to use us, didn't even know it existed, which is a waste of their money, let alone anything else. And make sure it doesn't have to be a big process, but, you know, as I think was mentioned already in a previous presentation, go ahead and put some post-deal reviews in. It does not have to be a 3-month exercise to survey, but just a very simple get-together to capture the learnings and build them. Don't build them into a separate document of learnings that, again, will sit in a drawer somewhere. Build it right back into that approach that you've got. So, I mean, if that playbook is 20 steps with a page each of here are the key things you need to make sure and do, here are the people you need to involve, and here's a list of hints and tips, the kind of don't run with scissors points. Those are the things that you can update. The best playbooks I ever saw back early on in my career were just really thin pamphlets that said, when you're managing a program, here are the 20 things you should think about. And it was nothing more than that. You know, much better that approach than a 300-page document. Again, especially for those smaller organizations who just won't have the time to go through it. And make sure, as it says here, you know, your leaders are trained. The third thing that, again, you will probably be familiar with as for those in kind of fast-growing organizations is that issue around the organization becoming more complex, and therefore the ability to easily communicate between the silos as they emerge becomes harder. The presentation from Shell this morning presented it very well. You invariably have all these different groups of people who will do different things. When you're smaller, it's one person, or probably one person who's doing 4 of those. And now suddenly you find yourself in a world where actually you've got 3 people in one organization that is looking after property, and another 4 people that are looking after HR, and another 10 that are looking after IT. So you need to make sure that you put some extra effort into confirming who's actually accountable for which piece, and make sure that you've got the communication. So, you know, agreeing absolutely with everything that you said in your presentation previously, there is another layer of communication, which is just making sure that your own internal people in the program know what's going on. And that's something which is often overlooked, especially because those senior leaders are usually already well into the deal. They know the details. But now you've got a due diligence team that hasn't involved those people. So there's lots of facets to, you know, as you said, change management to help make sure that they come along. And there's also the harder piece of just making sure that everybody knows basics like, why are we doing this deal? What are the objectives? What's the future operating model supposed to look like? Therefore, what are the priorities for due diligence, design, planning, and how is execution going? So make sure that you put those communication mechanisms in place. And communication mechanism could be nothing more complex than making sure that you've got those weekly meetings or a simple report that goes out to the entire team of people who are brought in. And so that last point, this is where some of the more formal change management tools and approaches really come into their own. Not because they're not needed with smaller businesses, everything there is, but the need to engage middle management especially becomes harder to do. Again, not more complex, but it just takes more effort. So you have to make sure and put that in place alongside the employee base generally or the customer base. We've seen a number of our clients actually say to us, we're no longer allowed to do M&A because our IT system isn't up to it. Our acquisition pipeline is now frozen because our finance system can't take another one. So as you get larger, you will need to know thyself and understand what you need to do to get integration ready. It's not just about the complexity or the increasing complexity of what you're buying, it's your own increasing complexity. And how many of us have seen those serial acquirers that are so successful at M&A because they have done 20 deals, 50 deals in the last 3 years? Great, what's your organization actually look like? Oh, well, there's 70 brands, and there's 30 organizations, and we do have 25 IT systems that are covering finance. And at the very least, it will prevent you from getting any of the actual synergies or benefits from one deal to the next. And at the worst, you'll end up in a situation such as that which Wolseley ended up with 10, 12 years ago. By all means, look it up. They were doing a deal a week up until the housing crisis, the subprime market crisis in 06, 07. And in the end, they didn't integrate any of them. And the whole thing just kind of came to a grinding halt. And they had to sell half of them again. Fortunately, they hadn't integrated them, so they were that much easier to sell. But it was a bit of a waste of time. So, at whatever point you can, have a good hard look at your core business processes, your IT systems, your data standards. How many ways do you code your products? If it's more than 2, have another look. Because those are the things which are going to make it easier for you to digest and turn integration into that core capability as much as acquisition. And that also applies obviously to things such as your policies, your practices, and especially, of course, things around cybersecurity and the reputational impact that now brings. What we've also seen, which I think is a good thing, especially over the last year and a bit, is a need to reconsider whether buying is in fact the right thing to do at all. A lot of organizations are quite correctly remembering their basics from business school that says, well, there's several ways to make use of a capability or to develop one. You can build it yourself internally, you can borrow it, you can rent it, you can share it, or you can buy it. And in a world of increasing uncertainty, sometimes something like a strategic alliance or a partnership is a better way of doing it. So 5, 10 years ago when we were doing conferences on the alliance side, a lot of people would talk about alliances as being something you do if you can't buy the company. It's only a second best. It's a fallback option. That's wrong. There are some very good strategic purposes for running strategic alliances that outweigh the advantage of doing it as an acquisition. If you don't believe it, talk to any pharma company that you happen to know, or an IT organization who have been successfully using alliances for the last 30, 40 years. So what a lot of organizations are now doing that we see is going back to their strategy and not thinking about an M&A strategy, not even thinking about the M&A they're going to do to achieve their overall strategy, which is better, but thinking about an inorganic strategy and actually doing the thinking and the financial analysis to say, what's our return going to be and what will the strategic advantages be if we enter into a strategic partnership for this one? rather than an outright acquisition. Yeah, so you have to think about all of those options in the round. And you can do analysis that will say, if we buy this capability, it's going to give us X. If we rent it, it's going to give us Y. If we build it ourselves, it's going to give us Z. You know, and there's not always one answer that comes out for each of those. And then the last point quickly to make is actually around culture. We worked with a client in the automated messaging sector a few years ago, and they had just gone through a survey with a group and were being criticized because they lost their entrepreneurial culture. They were now a company of 200 or 300 people, approaching 100 million, so still relatively small, but you know, this was IT, so you know, they still remembered the days 3 or 4 years before when it was 10 of them working out of a little shop above a hairdresser's, when it was all wonderful. Think back to the first slide. And they were tearing their hair out because they thought they were losing the entrepreneurial culture. That entrepreneurial culture was not helping them because they were at a stage where they needed to not have people running off and doing their own thing and not telling anyone. They needed to have a degree of process and standardization, especially as they were now in the arms of private equity, who of course are much more demanding in terms of data. And God help them if they were then to start thinking about going listed. So you need to be thinking in terms of good old-fashioned cultural, you know, assessment and alignment work, even perhaps for yourself, as opposed to just looking at yourself versus a potential acquisition. What are the behaviors that you have as an organization? What are the underlying assumptions and drivers of your operating model that are pushing those? Are those right, not for today's business? It's not about whether it's what it is in isolation. It's not about what it's like in comparison to your acquisition. It's about triangulating it with where you want to be in future. So you know, think about what that culture needs to be for the business that you anticipate in 3 years' time, and then work back from that to think about your leadership, the behaviors that you're encouraging or discouraging, and the degree to which those are hardwired into, as the head of HR at Unilever once said, you know, how you hire people, how you promote people, how you discipline them, you know, what you look for. Even just the simplest arrangement of making sure that your desired cultural attributes are part of your assessment for incoming employees or future leaders. You know, kind of an obvious, easy step that anybody can do at any size. And that's pretty much it. In summary, it's the 6 points. The things that we would suggest you look at are think about how you're going to be resourcing these deals. Start to look at hiring some of your own people without having too many. Reinforce a degree of standardization so that you amplify the experience especially as much as the skill set that you need for both pre-deal and post. Formalize those communications. Make sure that your IT systems and processes and data are ready for this. Think more broadly about your inorganic strategy. And make sure that you've got a culture which is focused on growth and maturity, not just trying to pretend that you were Google from 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And that's it for now. Thanks very much. What questions have we got?
I did have a quick question for you, Carlos.
Sure.
You mentioned making sure that you backfill people in their current role to give them the opportunity to work on M&As, to work on the integration, etc. A question for you: in those situations, how would you avoid people feeling redundant post-close, post-integration, knowing that actually the job they were doing is now being done by somebody else?
So 2 points on that. First, I guess to be clear, our experience of backfilling is not to replace, it's to support. So if your regional head of finance is now going to be involved in the due diligence for a particular deal, you're not replacing them with an interim regional head of finance, but you are giving them some extra resources to try and let them take some of the load off of that so that they're able to still try and do a bit of both. because it's almost impossible in my experience to second someone fully into an M&A role. They still have to do a little bit of both roles. I think in those cases where, and this is a more general point, when you take someone, especially in a role, say, of an integration manager, and you pull them out of the business to do that role, then you're absolutely right. There's lots of data that talks about how they end up being most uncertain because they're busy designing the organization and putting the organization in place around them. Just make sure that they know what their role is. You know, it's as simple as making sure that they know up front whether there's a seat on the bus that they're going to go back to, and that that's actually what they want to do. As I think we all know, integration is a bit of a Marmite activity. You either love it or you hate it. And for those who love it, they will probably want to keep doing it, if not with you, somewhere else. Yeah.
John Harren, Orbson. Do you have any observation about teams, and specifically the team that does the due diligence up to the point of the offer being made, and the team that does the integration, and the degree of overlap between these teams, and any good or bad behaviors you'd
How
like to
much
make?
time do you? Actually, no, you don't need a lot of time. Yes, in an ideal world, it's one and the same. At least the leadership. Sorry, yes. So the question is, the team that's doing the due diligence, to what degree does it overlap, or should it overlap the team delivering the integration? Obviously, there's a lot of nuance within that, but as a general rule, the more you can have the person who has to deliver integration being the one who is leading that piece of the due diligence, the more you're going to be able to look them in the eye and say, not can the company deliver this beyond the deal or post-close, can you deliver it? Because you're the one who's going to be tasked with doing so. And that makes them much more diligent and honest in their DD. So yes, you know, our pre-deal process absolutely has those people identified up front, and where we can, have them lead the due diligence, supported by technical experts where needed. Yeah.
All right. We have another virtual question. This is from Ute Grote-Leipold from Airbus. And Ute asks,
Hi, Ute.
What is the profile of an integration manager?
That is a big question. I was asked that question probably about 15 years ago by someone from GSK, and she actually asked it really well. She said, if I have to pull an integration manager from inside the business, what's the best function to take them out of? Should they be an IT person? Should they be a salesperson? Should they be from operations? Because we all know availability should not be considered a core skill when trying to find someone to do this, which was her quote as well. The best shortest answer, in my view, is you need someone who can deal with the ambiguity, talk at all levels, is good at engineering success. They facilitate the process. You know, we've seen every version of how to do this up and down, but our view remains that the best integration manager is a facilitator or a navigator, as opposed to someone who is commanding and controlling it. With all of that in mind, if you look at people like GE or some of the others who've kind of written the book on this years ago, they use integration management as a tool to both assess and develop their future high potential general managers. Because if you're a general manager, you need to be able to speak IT and sales. You need to have the ability to dive into the detail, but also come up and talk vision and strategy. So, you know, it isn't about one specific skill set other than the ability to look at someone and go, they could run a business unit. And so, yeah, what some companies will do is use this role to develop that individual so that, maybe not immediately, but at some point they end up becoming business unit. I mean, I'm seeing people like, yeah, Philip, are you same view? Yeah. So, sorry, he's not here, so I can't see whether that's answered his question, but hopefully so. What else? Anything else virtually?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, cool.
So, Carlos, thank you very much. I think a couple of very practical hints and tips on your 6 elements. I think that's a great takeaway for all of us. And that I want to thank you for keeping to time and for a great presentation.
Right.
So please join me in thanking Carlos.
Thanks very much, everyone.
And that means we'll now move on to the next presentation, which will be loaded up.
Yeah, and that might take... The next presentation will take a few moments to set up because the presenters are remote. So we will be in about 5 minutes ready to go with the Evolutionizer presentation. So grab a coffee, but we'll see you in 5 minutes.